Hey everyone, it's Chris, and you're listening to One Cross Radio. And if you couldn't tell by the title of the episode and the thumbnail, we are resharing our Spider-Man Unmade episode. Now, why am I resharing? When I said a couple weeks ago, hey, we're taking a little bit of a break, and we'll be back with a new episode on November the 13th. Well, true believer, the reason is I got sick while I was while I was away in Florida. Florida was an amazing time with Jill. It was absolutely wonderful. Got to go to Galaxy's Edge, go to the beach, meet one of Jill's friends, and just have a really, really great time and have one of the best burgers I've ever had in my life from the Cheesecake Factory. Um, but while I was down there, the pollen count was high and allergies were kicking my butt. At least what I thought were allergies. When I got back to Canada soon thereafter, things were lingering, and I thought it was allergies, and I went to a walk-in, and only to find out that I got bronchitis, which stuck around with me for about a week and a half. So then I also, while getting sick, tried to recover. Um, I started a new job on top of my EA gig. I had my first shift yesterday, and I'm also trying to pick up more hours to get to as close to full-time hours as I can with the school board, while also recovering from from bronchitis, and then my stomach just being like, "Hey, Chris, guess what? I'm gonna mess up your day." So the short of it is, I just have not been feeling up to recording a new episode or doing some complicated editing on a existing recorded episode. Um, and I got down to the wire. Basically, I try to have these things ready to go at least a couple days before the episode drops. To pull back the curtain, it is 5:05 Sunday evening. So before I release the couple 7 hours before the episode auto releases through Podbean. So because of that, I decided a couple days ago to do a reshare, but then on top of stomach issues and everything, anxiety was kicking my butt. So I'm now forcing myself to get this through. Why am I oversharing? Well, because I'm starving off, trying to not starve off, but repurpose some of that anxious energy because I was about to have I was having a mini panic attack. And why am I oversharing? Well, because sometimes being transparent about your mental health can help. Anyways, with it's also to share with all that, um, I am hoping to release new episodes soon, but as I'm picking up more work, and things are getting increasingly busy, don't be surprised if you see more reshares in the coming months. I say months because, hey, I'll try to have another episode before a brand new one before the end of the month, but Christmas is right around the corner, which is another very, very busy time. Um, so between that and the new job, I might be dipping into the vault. That's the advantage of being around for 5 years. I can reshare old episodes. Um, and hopefully you'll enjoy those as well, but we will be still doing new content. Sorry, my brain just hiccuped. Anyways, I'll let you go from here. Hope you're all being safe and staying warm and being your wonderful, awesome selves. Be kind to one another. God bless. Take care, my friends, and enjoy this episode of our Unmade series featuring good friend and awesome brother Steve Lambert as we look at unmade Spider-Man films. Hope you enjoy and take care. God bless, my friends. Peace.
Hey everyone, this is Chris, and you're listening to slash possibly watching One Cross Radio. And today we are joined by the always awesome brother from another mother and pastor extraordinaire, Steve
Father.
Lambert. Steve and father. Steve,
Yep.
how you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been a while since we've seen each other, but we've been chatting for like a good half hour. So since
Yeah, we
before
already actually asked how you're good, how you're doing. So we're lying to all you out there in podcast land, like pretending like this is the beginning of our conversation. It's not. It's not. We were talking beforehand. You
that's
can't
a
trust.
Christian brought that up on an episode we did of our sub-series Into the Weeds. We was just like, it's so weird because we've been talking for a while and now we have to act like we're
Yeah,
doing the introduction again.
yeah,
But it's weird to just start recording right off the bat. Like
yeah.
you got to ease into it. Um, so, listener, you can tell by the title of this episode, we are in our second episode of our Unmade sub-series, where we were looking at, for whatever reason, movies that didn't get beyond the pitch or got to varying levels of pre-production or some production that fell through, that stopped getting made. In today's episode, we're looking at another superhero, one of mine and Steve's favorites. I think, Steve, he is your favorite, right?
My favorite, absolutely. Yeah,
And you're like my go-to guy for Spider-Man. So I thought it would be very appropriate to look at some of the unmade movies from Spider-Man.
yeah. I have to admit, I didn't know almost anything about any of these except for the more recent ones. I had to look at some articles and Wikipedia pages and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah. What I was actually saying to Hector, Pastor Hector Mirai from Faith and Fandom, listener, please check him out. Awesome dude, awesome podcast, awesome ministry, great writer, Faith and Fandom series, and also his Things I Learned from Sucking at Ministry series. So many great things. He was asking me about this because he's like, this is cool. Like, this is a cool concept. And I'm like, it's just been a lot of fun where we've been in, not lockdown anymore, but
restriction.
we've been home a lot more. So it's been a lot more wandering on the internet, but in this case, wandering to good places, and learning about movies like Batman, for example. Batman had so many movies, and some were famous, like what would have been Tim Burton's third Batman or Joel Schumacher's. But then even looking at like other series like Star Trek, Godzilla, other things where you're just like, holy cow, there's some stuff here where you're like, why were they thinking of this? But
Yeah,
then the challenge is also finding someone being like, huh, maybe I would be into it. What kind of sparked it, and I think I talked about it in Batman one, was well before they started filming and retweaking the Snyder cut of Justice League. There was a lot of released material for what his Justice League was going to be, the two-parter. And as much as I didn't dig Batman Superman, once you kind of get on board with like, okay, this isn't necessarily what I want, because what I want is the comic book versions of these characters on the big screen.
yeah,
Can I find stuff that I'm interested in? And there was a lot of stuff from that pitch, from his stuff, where I'm like, huh, that does harken back to some of the stupid stuff in Batman Superman, but at least it makes it less stupid because there's a payoff now.
yeah. I mean, his Justice League is sort of the deconstructed version of the Justice League. It's like the Watchmen version of the Justice League, or like the Ultimates.
Yeah.
From Mark Millar's version of the Avengers, right?
And I lost you. We'll just wait. Dave?
I'm still here. Sorry,
Hey!
you got lost.
All right. Hey, it's all good.
So yeah, I was saying it's sort of like this idea of, if this actually happened in real life,
yeah,
people wouldn't be excited about Superman. People would be scared of him, right? And Batman probably would have to kill people. And so I mean, I get what he's going for, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, it's not what people want to see. People want to see the Justice League.
Yeah.
So
it was like through that one, it was interesting. Or there was a documentary a number of years ago called "What Happened to basically What Happened to Superman Lives," and Superman Lives. Like, of course, most of us in the geek community have heard the story from Kevin Smith and his stuff writing with John Peters, and then for the longest time, the only leaked image was like a terrible, overexposed photo of Nick Cage in an awful looking suit. But then the documentary went into what Tim Burton's plans were beyond the limited knowledge. some of the other stuff, and it's still like, okay, this is weird, but
Yeah.
it did show some of the promise with it.
Yeah.
And that's
But
one where,
we are here to talk about Spider-Man, not
yes, no,
Superman.
well, that's my long-winded way of getting there.
Okay.
It's just the fun of looking at these things and being like, huh. So there have been a number of Spider-Man films that, more than even like, you told me today some of these, and that I had never heard about. And then I
Yeah.
even think I dropped one on you earlier, like the earliest one that none of us knew about, like from the guy who did the 60s cartoon show, who had pitched a movie. Like,
Yeah. So I mean, one of the crazy things about all these characters is they've been around for a long time, right? Not Spider-Man hasn't been around as long as Batman has, but one of the things that's sort of made Stan Lee, is he was a pitch man. He was a salesman, right? Like he wanted to get these characters into the mainstream and on the screens as early as he could. He was always trying to get Hollywood to buy up the rights to these and make movies and cartoons and live action shows. And so even before any of these sort of serious, or maybe not so serious, ideas for Spider-Man movies, I mean, there was like the Nicholas Hammond 1970s live action TV show, which has a couple TV movies that came out of that, right? Fun fact, Nicholas Hammond played one of the Von Trapp children on Sound of Music.
huh.
So, yeah. Anyway, so I mean, there's, that show where they'd turn the camera and have him climbing up the wall, or, had some crazy, I mean, it was good special effects for what they could do for TV at the time, but they're pretty cheesy now. And then there's the Japanese Spider-Man, where he had a giant
Yeah.
Transformers robot before there were Transformers robots. Like that was the original one,
Yep.
right? The Big Mac. Did you
Yep.
know that show, like 75% of them have the exact same shot of Leopard on the big robot throwing his sword at the end to defeat the bad guy? Because after about 4 episodes, someone stole the suit, so they had to reuse the same footage over and over again. I mean, there's just crazy stuff about
I didn't know that.
Spider-Man's history in these kind of screen things, even before you get into some of these things that we're talking about. But a lot of this comes from, I think, Stan Lee going out there and saying, "I want someone to make a movie of this. Like, who's there? Who wants to do it?" And then it just got tied up in legal rights for a long time, so these pitches just never came to anything. But yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you have for
Yeah.
the list?
So before we get into that, I'll just quickly say, dear listener, if you're noticing any audio issues, it's just because we're recording on Skype, and my internet is not the best. So if you suddenly hear Steve sounding weird or me sounding weird, it's because it's Skype, and Skype hates me. We'll do what we can, but we really wanted to bring this episode to you.
This episode is brought to you by Skype and Tech Savvy. Whatever you have, I have
one of those things is better than the other. It's Tech Savvy.
What happened to you, Skype? You had the whole market on this and you just fell apart.
I know. Okay, so I guess the first one we'll talk about is the one that I sent to you earlier. It's not much, like really not much is known, aside from. So originally, the guy who did the Spider-Man cartoon from the 60s, the one that most people still remember because of the theme has become iconic, even when the show has not. Like, the show has, I think it's safe to say it hasn't aged well, but not much animation from that time has.
Well, is this Ralph Bakshi that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Go ahead.
He had planned kind of like a jokey musical, but Stan Lee was like, no, like this is like flat out said no to it. And then he paused trying to push for something, but then eventually one of the most iconic Spider-Man stories, the night that Gwen Stacy died, happened. So he wanted to do a live adaptation of that story. So it would be Spider-Man against the Green Goblin. And this part was the baffling one: Nazis. That's all that's known. It's going to be an adaptation of The Night That Gwen Stacy Died, but also featuring Nazis.
Yeah. Well, Spider-Man's trying to get the Holy Grail from the Nazis. Or the
Well, I was going to say, the only thing I can think of is Indiana Jones was hot at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you know who this was? Who was front running this? Was it Ralph Bakshi?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. Because he did the second and third season of the Spider-Man cartoon, but somebody else did the first season. So I was wondering. I forget the other guy's
actually,
name,
it was filmmaker Steve Krantz.
Okay.
Yeah. And with the musical idea, he was wanting Elton John and Mick Jagger as stars.
I mean, that would be kind of cool.
Well, that's one of those where
When Elton John played Gwen Stacy.
That's one of those where, and we're gonna come to it when we get to another entry on this list, where it's one of those so weird I'm interested kind of things where you're like, what?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So next up, there was an idea for a Spider-Man movie in the 80s. Let's see. I'm trying to.
So there was one that Roger Corman and Stan Lee worked on together, and Stan Lee was actually the scriptwriter for it. And I'm trying to remember exactly how that came together, but Roger Corman was the one who went on to do the terrible '90s Fantastic Four movie that never got released.
Yeah.
And he was working with Stan Lee on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the interesting fact about Roger Corman is, like, he is known and respected, or at least was at the time, for being able to do films on an incredibly low budget, like still somehow making them work. Fantastic Four aside.
Well, that was a stunt to just keep the rights.
Yeah.
Right? They never meant for that to go out. So here's what Stan Lee wanted, according to Looper.
I read that one earlier.
Yeah, he wanted to have a big budget spectacular with a big, like, the climax would be a fight between Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man on top of the United Nations building, and would include several love interests for Peter Parker, including Mary Jane and a Russian KGB agent.
So I guess Silver Sable.
Yeah, I guess basically, but she hadn't been invented yet. She wouldn't be around for a lot.
Yeah.
Well, no, in the 80s, I guess she would have been, but not by Stan Lee.
And
so
it also would have featured. There would have been a looming plot where Spidey would stop nuclear war with Russia. So instead of Rocky solving the Cold War, Spidey would.
Yes, exactly.
It would have changed the plot of Rocky IV.
You wouldn't have needed that fight with the Russian.
Apollo Creed wouldn't have needed to die. This is one of those ones where I'm looking at this and it seems very much like a product of its time. But
sure.
The thing is, with a lot of these, as you learn about them, I'm still kind of like, you know what? Why not do an animated of this? Just why not? Just throw it out there, especially because Marvel doesn't do enough on the animation front. DC has that market under, like, lock and barrel, basically. But Marvel's got enough stuff, and you've got abandoned movies that are just ripe for it. And you can even see with DC how you can have some successes with that, with even some of the obscure stuff. Like, there was 2 Adam West Batman movies, animated ones, that are just so odd but have a charm, where it's just like, why not? And this one I'd watch so much. It'd be like, I'd watch so fast. It'd be a lot of fun. I can't say that for an upcoming movie, but the next one is a very different take on Spider-Man. So it was also in the 80s. There was going to be a Spider-Man horror movie.
Yeah, so that's the thing about these movie studios that just know that an intellectual property can make them some money, right? And the Canon Studios picks up the license, and they want to take the general concept of a Spider-Man and just do something completely different with it, right?
Yeah.
So, again, this is according to Looper. We have Tobe Hooper, who is the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was one that they were approaching, and they wanted to do a horror influenced adaptation. I'm just reading this off the page, in which Spider-Man would have been transformed by someone named Dr. Zork into a human spider hybrid, complete with 8 limbs, and battle against Dr. Zork's other creations rather than joining them. So I mean, that's just like a full out, Twilight Zone, ridiculous. And so here's what's interesting about this. There are horror versions of Spider-Man out there, right? So you've probably heard of the Spider-Verse movie. It was based loosely on a comic called Spider-Verse, in which sort of every version of Spider-Man that ever existed comes together to fight this big battle. But before they started that series, they had a limited series called. Oh, are you still there?
Yep.
Do you hear everything I just said?
Yep.
Okay. Before they did the series Spider-Verse, they had a limited series called The Edge of the Spider-Verse, where they introduced a whole bunch of new characters. So Spider-Gwen was introduced in there, and there's one of those issues where it's just literally horror Peter Parker who gets bit by a spider and gets turned into a monster and he eats people. And I think he has Uncle. It's not Uncle Ben, it's like Uncle Ted or something like that, who's like abusive and like, just this whole thing. So I mean, there are versions
sully
of this.
Ben.
Sorry?
They can't sully Uncle Ben. They'll kill him repeatedly, but they'll never paint him in a bad light.
Exactly. So I mean, there's versions of. I mean, this concept of the character is very versatile, right? That's part of the reason that it works so well, is that you can do so many different versions of it. Not that I'm saying this movie should be made, but there are versions that are more horror themed that are interesting.
Well, heck, even the 90s Spider-Man show, there was the one episode that you could almost look at as borderline horror, where he became the man spider, right?
Sure.
So there's a little bit of room for that. The weirdest thing out of the whole pitch is Zork. That's just a terrible name.
Yeah.
I'm weirdly more on board with the rest, but I'm like, you lose me at Zork.
It sounds like the kind of movie that you would watch as a kid in the middle of the night when you had cable, right? And you was like, what's on TV? You ended up at like Turner Classic Movies with like their random sci-fi movies from the 50s.
Right. And the other thing of note is just how cheap, now at the time probably expensive, but how cheap the Spider-Man rights were.
Yeah.
$225,000. That's nothing. I mean, that's a lot for us.
Yeah.
For studios,
I take a loan out and buy that.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like for studios, that's bread money. That's nothing.
Yeah, that's your craft services.
Exactly.
Or probably not.
Where it's just like, how much is Sony getting for it now? That's the part that stands out.
Yeah. Well, and so they didn't obviously go with that version of it, and before they gave up, Canon went up with a different version of it as well, right? So they had a much more regular sounding version of it. That was Spider-Man in college fighting Dr. Octopus, and it had the Uncle Ben death scene and all that kind of stuff like that. And there's actually a teaser trailer for that you can find on YouTube.
I've got it. I saw it, and it's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's most interesting about that is that they were looking at Tom Cruise for Peter Parker back in the late 80s, early 90s when he was young and doing Jerry Maguire and things like that.
There's so many interesting casting ideas where you're like, huh. And I don't know if I can picture Tom Cruise as Spider-Man.
No, I don't think it would have been a good fit at all. But
although, actually, it's weird that he hasn't been cast as the Flash, just because he runs an awful lot. He's got that part down.
Just typecast.
Just, you need somebody to run. You get either David Tennant or like anybody who's played a recent Doctor, because they run all the time in that show, or Tom Cruise, because give that man an excuse to run for like a long time in a movie and he'll do it. Yeah. All right, so next up is, honestly, to me, this is the worst movie on this list of unmade ones.
Yeah, it's a strange one.
Yeah, it's so we're in the 90s now, and director James
That's always a bad sign for Spider-Man. If you're in the 90s, unless you're reading Spectacular and the Death of Harry Osborn, everything's gonna be bad. Just nothing's gonna be good.
um I, I'll mostly agree, but I still enjoyed
No, there are
Carnage,
some good things.
Maximum
I'm
Carnage,
exaggerating.
but yeah, I
Yeah.
know, I know.
Well, Maximum Carnage is like
It's fun. It's
it's
fun
not
fluff.
good. It's very 90s. It's
Yeah,
not the Clone Saga.
we've still got to do our episode about comics in the 90s. We'll figure that out.
We'll figure it out at some point.
So yeah, director James Cameron, who used to be most famous for incredible action films such as Aliens, Terminator 1, the outstanding Terminator 2, the underrated True Lies, lesser famous for Piranha 2.
Oh, really?
And oh yeah, he did that. That was like his first directorial effort. And he made a joke about it being like, it's the best movie about flying piranhas you'll ever see. And of course, for the outstanding film Titanic, and most known now
Avatar.
for bad movies about blue alien people and bad versions of Pocahontas in space.
I mean, stunning movies, but not particularly
Visually stunning,
yeah.
just not good. So at one point, James Cameron was going to do a Spider-Man movie, and it's actually why we couldn't get certain characters in the animated Spider-Man show. It's why the Green Goblin couldn't show up till the third season.
Yeah, and
Because he was
Electro too.
and Electro couldn't show up till the fifth season. And why they never had Sandman, they introduced Hydro Man instead.
Yeah.
Because there was going to be stuff in these characters were going to be in the Spider-Man movie.
If they had Sandman instead of Hydro Man, then Mary Jane could never have evaporated and wouldn't have been crushed as a child.
It's true. She would have just turned to It might have been the original dusting.
I guess that's true. Yeah. That was horrific.
Oh man, but so good. Like
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
Still hurt a little bit.
Oh yeah, dude, show made you care. So there's hallmarks of a Cameron film, like a high budget, and I enjoyed Cameron's films at the time. T2 is one of the best action movies of all time, and I'm curious about his take on superheroes. But as you read about this,
the problem with it is, while T2 is an intense and good action movie, it's not. You don't want that as Spider-Man, right? It's violent, it's gory, it's a lot of swearing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this is sort of where he is going with Spider-Man too.
Yeah. You're just like, this isn't Spider-Man. Like the character, like Kane Parker, you could maybe do this with, like, if you wanted like a Scarlet Spider movie, the Kane Parker version, okay, that kind of lines up with this movie. But that wasn't Spider-Man at the time. Heck, that wasn't Scarlet Spider at the time. Yeah. So this would have been R-rated. The movie would have had Spider-Man facing off against Electro, but he also wanted it to be R-rated, littered with profanity. Had a scene where Peter and Mary Jane have sex on the Brooklyn Bridge while talking about
go ahead.
Spider-Man, or not Spider-Man, spider mating practices.
Does that mean he gets eaten at the end?
Well, if she's a Black Widow, yeah.
Oh, it was Mary Jane, not Black Widow. That's good.
One thing that did stick around from this pitch to the eventual first Spider-Man movie done by Sam Raimi was he was going to have organic web shooters. There was also going to involve Sandman. At points, he wanted Leonardo DiCaprio in the role. He had him eyed for both Harry Osborn and Peter Parker / Spider-Man, which Leo at the time would have made sense. He was in his heartthrob days. And Leo's a terrific actor. You didn't know it necessarily at the time because he was in his heartthrob phase.
That's true.
And like some other pitches, this is the one where I'm like, I everything about this movie, because it's just so not Spider-Man, I don't want. But this is where we also get to one of those things where I'm like, that's so odd that color me interested. Coming off of T2, there was the idea of Edward Furlong as, as Peter Parker, but much more interestingly, Arnold Schwarzenegger as Dr. Octopus.
Yep.
I love it. It's so terrible, but I love it.
All I can picture is Dr. Octopus with sunglasses and a leather jacket. And things like hasta la vista, or something. I don't know, like
like Arnie brings an energy and a different kind of thing to his roles, but
or he's just making terrible octopus puns all the way through, like Mr. Freeze.
That's the other thing. Like,
so you know how many tickles it takes to tickle an octopus? 10 tickles.
Like, I'm really curious. I'm actually legit curious about what Arnie would bring to a comic book movie when not being directed by Joel Schumacher. And it's not to knock Schumacher, because he, like, when you watch the DVDs of the Batman Legacy set, you see all the stuff around it. And then, like we explored in the Batman Unmade, he did have plans to take things in a darker direction. But there's footage
that's
from...
That's not a very high bar, though.
True. But some of the, or learning about some of the stuff that he had for Batman Forever, you're just kind of like, there was some good there. It just didn't make it to the screen. But that was also pressure from the studio, pressure from toy companies. And then the attitude on set was like, we're making a cartoon, people. Like, I'm curious what Arnie would have done under a different director. So, yeah. But this is one of those where I'm like, I hate most of this. But if you give me a version of it, like, especially coming off the Lego Batman movie, where they included so many old stuff, where it's like Billy D. Williams voiced Two-Face and all that kind of thing, I'm like, you know what? I'd be interested.
I mean, the Spider-Verse movies are a good place to do that kind of thing, because that's the whole idea, is they're seeing all these different versions of Spider-Man, right? And there's so many Easter eggs that are packed into that first movie.
So next up,
well, before we get there, so just before we get to this next thing, where we start to get into the period where movies are actually being made of Spider-Man, there was this weird thing where somehow both MGM and Columbia had the rights to Spider-Man movies at the same time, and that was why nothing happened for a long time, is because they were disputing who had the rights to this.
Right.
And do you know how they resolved it, Chris?
No. Did they flip a coin?
No. Well, that's never going to happen with these big studios. Because both MGM and owned another franchise as well, or were fighting over the rights of 007 as well.
Right.
So they traded. Columbia gave up 007 and MGM gave up Spider-Man, and then they were able to kind of resolve that, because Columbia made those weird, like, Casino Royale and the other movies that not the one with that came out in the past 20 years or whatever, but but like a silly one, and they had their own kind of branch of, and they went back and made one with Sean Connery again, I think, too, right? A long time later.
Yeah, that one's actually got a pretty good fan reception within the Bond community. Bond's a different. I'd love to do a Bond one with you at some point. That'd be fun.
That'd be good. But so, and that's the weird little piece of trivia of how this all kind of got resolved before we get into the part where Columbia Sony has all the rights. But anyway, go ahead.
So next up, we're jumping forward about, let's say, 17 years. This is, I'd say, the most well-known, and by most in the fan community, the most desired of the abandoned Spider-Man movies. We're at Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4.
Well, no, we're not yet. There's one before that. There's I mean, this never got beyond a pitch, but before Columbia went to Sam Raimi, they went to Edward Fincher.
David Fincher.
Sorry, David Fincher.
Yeah, right. This one. This one I want.
And so they actually came to him again after they got rid of the Sam Raimi before they went to Mark Webb, and both times he said he just pitched himself out of the job because they didn't want what he had. So according to Looper, according to what I read in this article, right, he talks about how he pitched a movie where they didn't go into the origin again, or didn't go into the origin at all because nobody wanted to see that. They basically summed it up in a music video at the beginning, which I'm not sure where that idea comes from, but the idea of kind of skipping over and giving a recap is good. That's sort of what they did in Spider-Verse, is what they did at the beginning of The Incredible Hulk too.
Well, his background is also, like, before Alien 3, most of his directing work was music videos.
Okay.
So then also I'm imagining, like, I doubt it's a music video, but probably a montage, but like to an opening credits.
Sure. It's to the tune of Raindrops Keep Falling on Your Head. Cool. Yeah. So that never went anywhere. And besides that, it was just a very it was Green Goblin kind of getting into the psychological elements of what it was like to lose the people that you love and those kind of things. Sort of a deep, dark, twisty one, sounds like. Which
that one I'm crazy interested in. Like starting a movie off the bat with the night that Gwen Stacy died, which is like he was going to do the music video thing and then launch into that. That's a bleak way to start a movie.
Yeah. Music video crash cut into Gwen Stacy's neck snap.
But then also him saying, focusing on the psychology of the character and direct quote, the idea of being a teenager, the notion of this moment in time when you're so vulnerable yet completely invulnerable. That's really, really interesting to me. This is one where I'd be like, please give us an animated adaptation of this. Yeah. Like, it's interesting how one of the things I love about comic book characters is how many different facets and different ways we can approach them. It's like with other characters as well. Like you can look at Bond. Like some just want the suave spy, some want the sillier, lighter stuff that you got in the war era with the gadgets, and you're just like, it doesn't have to be an either or. It can be a both and. Yeah. Batman as well. Like you can enjoy the 66 show or the 66 run on the comics or those animated movies while still liking the dark and gritty Batman. And with Spider-Man, even though he's not dark and gritty, he has so much tragedy that he could lend himself to it in smaller or isolated doses. And that's where I'm like, this would be so interesting.
And the best Spider-Man stories, the ones that people generally agree are the ones that everyone loves, dark and gritty. So like Kraven's Last Hunt is a psychological, dark, twisty story, right? I also
Spider-Man Reign? I mean, come on.
I wouldn't put that up there as one of the best stories ever.
I know.
But the attempt of making a Dark Knight version of Spider-Man. Anyway, but I mentioned earlier the death of Harry Osborn as well, right? Mm-hmm. Also written by the same writer, J.M. DeMatteis, is my favorite Spider-Man story. The whole arc leading up to that, where Harry Osborn just starts to lose it, and it's just super tense and awful. I mean, you can do, and it has been done well, dark, gritty Spider-Man stories. They often think about the light, Spider-Man, action is his reward kind of Spider-Man. But I mean, Gwen Stacy's death, Uncle Ben's death, he's an orphan. I mean, Harry Osborn becoming the Green Goblin and dying.
The Parker luck.
All this stuff it's tragic. That's and if you read that early run of Spider-Man comics by Lee and Ditko, I mean, he's not a nice guy. He's constantly just going off at people, and every once in a while considering maybe I should just be a villain. Like, people really didn't like that about the first Amazing Spider-Man by Mark Webb, but that's just Ditko comics. Like, he's like, I could probably just make more money for Aunt May if I just robbed something. They all think I'm a bad guy anyway, right? So that comes up in the comics.
Well, they also had that in like shades of that in Spectacular Spider-Man,
the TV show.
Yeah, and I appreciated that a lot. Where he's not like a big red and blue Boy Scout. He does do the right thing most of the time, but there's shades to this character, even
Sure.
without the symbiote. Um, oh, so help me! I hate that Venom movie for symbiote so much. Um, so the other weird thing about this is the part where I'm just like, this is the only part where I'm like, I don't know about this. Is Fincher reportedly wanted Edward Norton in the role,
Hmm.
which does make sense for the take he's doing. Um, and the article is right to point out, like, it might be strange because he was 30 years old, but Maguire was nearly 30 when he played Spider-Man. It's
Yeah.
just more so when you think Edward Norton, you don't immediately think Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Um, he did make sense as a Bruce Banner for me, especially if
Yeah.
they're doing a slightly more like tortured take on the character
Yeah.
than he does a
You can
Peter
do a take
Parker.
where he doesn't know that he's Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's always played by Brad Pitt.
Steve, I think we're making this movie.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so then we are jumping back to the one that I mistakenly jumped to.
That's okay.
The most well-known and most desired Spider-Man movie that was never made, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4. Um, which I gotta say, as I read through it, like it's well known, it's documented. I wasn't a fan of the Raimi Spider-Man films, of any of them, and I was fine with the reboot because Spider-Man 3 was what it was, and I didn't love what came before it. Um, but as I read through this, it's not like I'd be, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm in, because it was also three prior movies that I didn't like. And Sam Raimi himself was like, if this was going to be anything less than great, like I shouldn't make this movie. Sony didn't sack him; it was a mutual decision.
Hmm.
Um, but I gotta say, there are kind of some interesting aspects to it, where
I mean,
it
who
might be
would
like,
want to see John Malkovich as the Vulture? That sounds
well,
awesome.
like that part, I'm like, yo, that's kind of good actually.
Yeah.
That's a cool casting. Before we get to Michael Keaton being a goblin vulture hybrid, but also
Yeah.
that terrifying performance where you're afraid he's going to murder a 13-year-old in a limo. We would have
Yeah.
lost that. So
15, but
yeah, yeah, you get what I mean. A
yeah.
child.
Yeah.
um,
Well, and then finally also getting to see, I forget the actor's name who plays Dr. Connors, see him as the lizard. That was going to be in there as well, right?
the lizard was planned. So it looked like the main idea for it was going to be the vulture and Black Cat, but Black Cat would have quickly become like the Vultress. Um,
Of course.
well,
Because why
because
not?
apparently the concern was she would be seen as too much of a ripoff of Catwoman. But these characters have coexisted in visual mediums for ages, and
Yeah.
also like
Like
it's
Catwoman
comic
is a lot
books and
more
superhero
popular. Like
movies.
she's more well known than Black Cat.
Yeah,
The interesting thing about it is, I have to look at the history of it, but I've heard from some of the Spider-Man creators saying that though Black Cat came first, the idea of her being a criminal who's really a love interest, and there's kind of that tension there, that was Black Cat, and then Catwoman
huh?
matched her afterwards. So I don't know. I think that's true, but that's what I've heard.
These companies have been you can say ripping off or taking inspiration from each other for
Sure.
as long as they've been around.
Yeah.
Fantastic Four and later Avengers was directly inspired by the Justice League. Heck, it was a mandate because of the Justice League.
Yeah.
Like, and then of course you get into the rip-off characters, like direct rip-off characters.
Like
Uh,
Deadpool.
yeah, but he became his own character and a very different one.
Hmm.
Or Lobo from Wolverine and all
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is some stuff from here where I'm like, you know what, that kind of would have been interesting. And I believe, oh wait, no, because she was Gwen Stacy. I was like, oh, Bryce Dallas Howard, but no.
Yeah, she was already in it.
Yeah,
She
no,
was too busy on being a model for photocopiers.
such a bad movie. All
Yeah.
right, so the next one up is Amazing Spider-Man 3.
Can I correct you again?
Sure, please.
So there was actually a plan for a Venom movie with Topher Grace
Oh, right.
that never
Right.
went anywhere. I mean, it's sort of analogous to the Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman movie that turned into the Halle Berry Catwoman movie.
Right.
Uh, but it's the Topher Grace Venom movie that eventually became the Tom Hardy Venom movie. But it's just after Spider-Man 3, they just completely threw it out, right? It was just sort of like,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll probably go there, but they didn't.
So I'll say, like, I'm not enough that I'd want to see it or want it to be an animated movie or anything, but because the Venom movie itself was not good. Was what it was, and an R rating would have helped that. It really would have. Um, because then, anyways,
I enjoyed the Venom movie. I agree it's not great, but I was like, well, that was more fun than it was good, but I had fun watching it.
it is. It's more fun than it is good. It's just also like at one point they were like well early into production. They were leaning on it was going to be R rated, and then
Yeah.
somewhere along the way they're like, okay, we're going to do it PG-13, and then you can see where it would have been R rated. I'm like, okay, at least the promise of ridiculous symbiote carnage, not
Symbiote.
carnage. Oh my gosh, drove me insane. Every single time I was like, oh. But at least then, like that, like getting that level of ridiculous violence, like it, and it would have been fun. It would have distracted me from some of the other, like, just really bad stuff. But then it's like, oh man, we're getting a room of terrible, just not, yeah, no. There's some stuff that I liked, and then others not so much.
I mean, there's obviously parts of it that are better than others. Like Tom Hardy just killed it. Like he
Oh yeah,
sitting in the lobster tank and eating the raw chicken and going crazy. He was amazing. And then there's the weird makeout scene with the
yeah,
Venom. Like
yeah.
what?
It was
Ah.
like, I think the best review, and you shared it with me, the best review title was like, this is a 2000s comic book movie in 2018 or 2019, whatever
Yeah.
year it came out.
Yeah.
And it was very accurate. But then also in thinking about it, because before the movie came out, I revisited some of Venom's comics from the 90s, like the Lethal Protector miniseries and all that. And it was not necessarily the best adaptation of the stories, but the spirit of it, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, they cranked a lot in there. Lady Venom showing up,
Yep.
all that. I'm like, okay, you know what? It did get some of it.
I mean, that's true for the Wolverine Origins movie too, right? Like the problem with that movie wasn't that they didn't stick to the resource material. They tried to stick to all of the resource material all at the same time. And
What's the problem with X-Men Origins Wolverine? It's easier to start with what isn't the problem.
yeah, that's true.
That's a much shorter list.
At least they got Deadpool right in it.
But
kidding.
so I'll say though, a lot of people did, but I didn't hate the casting of Topher Grace. The direction he got, I wasn't necessarily a fan of, but it was, again, like that was ultimate Eddie Brock, like on the screen. That's what we were getting. And Topher Grace I find can be a really good actor. Like most of the time you get the snarky Eric Foreman kind of stuff, but he does have a bit of range. The church scene, which doesn't make any sense, his performance was good in that.
Thomas Hayden Church, or the scene where they're in the church?
The scene where he's like, where Eddie Brock is praying to God, like, I want you to kill Peter Parker. It doesn't make any sense, but his performance in the scene is good. So where they've got the idea of him as kind of a likable Venom, like in a solo movie, that I can get behind on paper. In execution, especially after what we saw in Spider-Man 3, no.
Yeah.
But on paper, I'm like, that's an all right idea. And it probably wouldn't have been that different from what we got with Tom Hardy, just not necessarily a different, but not as good performance, or just a very different performance. And of course, there was the long rumored Jim Carrey as Carnage floating around in that era, which
I've heard that.
I don't think Jim Carrey would do it now, but Jim Carrey at the time, I'm like, that's interesting. Because especially at the time, he was still like, you knew him from Liar Liar and stuff, but he was also
Ace
doing
Ventura,
but he was also doing intense thriller movies like The Number 23, which is terrible and stupid, but his performance was good.
Okay.
Like that kind of thing. Jim Carrey as Cletus Cassidy, color me interested.
Yeah.
All right, so then am I correct in saying we're now at the
Yes.
cancel? Okay, so the next one is the canceled Amazing Spider-Man 3 on What Culture. They have the page list. Its subtitle is Resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
So, thoughts, sir?
I mean, yeah, from what I've seen about it, the basic idea was that he was going to resurrect, figure out a way to resurrect Gwen Stacy and her dad, as most high school teenagers would be able to do. Um, and then she was going to become Spider-Gwen, I think was also in there. And like just got, go into, I mean, have you seen the deleted scene from the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2 where his dad
shows up?
Dad shows up, right? So I'm sure that would have played into it. I don't know if they would have eventually put Mary Jane in there too, because Shailene Woodley had shot all those scenes where she was supposed to be Mary Jane.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things about the Amazing Spider-Man movies is that there was so much that got cut out of the movie, both of them, the first movie and the second movie. The first movie, like, it feels like pieces of the movie are missing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just plot threads just get dropped or show up out of nowhere because there's whole scenes that got cut out of it, right? So I have to assume that there were pieces like that they had prepared for what was coming next that they had left out. I mean, they still had that whole scene with the Sinister Six stuff at the end that they were kind of trying to set things up.
Yeah.
But yeah, who knows how that would have gone.
Like, I'll be honest, I don't hate this.
No.
It's weird. Like, it's really weird. But this is one where I'd be like, if you make this as an animated movie, I'm definitely checking it out. I'm watching it so quick. Because it's one of those things where I'd be like, you know what? I could buy this take on Spider-Man being very, like, in this movie, he's very, very sciencey. He's just lost the love of his life, and it like Uncle Ben died, that hit him. Gwen's dad died, and he feels responsible, that hit him. Gwen died, and they did it in the way where it could be his fault, like a grief-stricken Peter Parker trying to bring back people that he's lost.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting story.
Yeah.
I don't know if the execution, especially because of the issues that were going on with Sony at the time, and like trying to force in like a Spider-Verse out of Amazing Spider-Man 2, like how that would have impacted 3. We can also say like there was a planned Amazing Spider-Man 4. I have no idea what the details were. I don't know if any got leaked. But it was planned at one point. They did one, and then they were like, all right, we're doing 3 more. They didn't even do like the trilogy. They banked on a quadrilogy.
Yeah. I think that's part of the reason that I'd like to see this movie made, like, because it just feels like they didn't finish the story, right?
Yeah.
Like there's more to it that's supposed to happen. And it's probably just I'd like to see it once and then forget about it, because I didn't like Amazing Spider-Man 2 is my least favorite of the Spider-Man movies.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's
well,
always interesting.
Also, if you're like, the idea is potentially setting up a Spider-Gwen movie, like as a spinoff, I'm down. I like the Spider-Gwen character. I loved Emma Stone's version of Gwen Stacy. So it's like, yeah, why not? It's you need everything to be landing accordingly, because this is a weird story.
Mm-hmm. The other piece of it probably is that Felicity Jones was in it as a secretary at Oscorp, and she was Felicia Hardy, setting her up to play the Black Cat later on. So it was like you wouldn't have known that she was Felicia Hardy if they hadn't told you that she was Felicia Hardy, because there was nothing to the character at all. But yeah, as something that was supposed to pay off later on too. So
yeah, that one is, out of the abandoned ones, one of them. Just under the Fincher one, I'd say, if I'm ranking them out of ones where I'd be like, yeah, I'm crazy interested in that, like comic book form or whatever. Fans, we're doing a lot of fan adaptations of stuff that got abandoned that's not for profit. Somebody jump on this because I'm curious.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so
I think we're just into the random spin-offs now.
yes, so like Silver and Black, Venom, but that eventually got made, and Sinister Six, Glass Ceiling's kind of in there as well.
So I feel like Sinister Six is the movie that ruined all the Spider-Man movies because they were so desperate to set that up that they just shoehorned stuff in, like Paul Giamatti as the Rhino in Amazing Spider-Man 2, like, and the random
Probably
guy
the weirdest casting.
Oh, so strange
ever.
And was it the guy with the bowler hat that kept appearing and could, like, knew more about what was going on with Oscorp or whatever, would play into that as well. Yeah, I mean, that movie's probably still coming somewhere down the line.
I was going to say, it seems like Sony hasn't given up on that. Like, when you look at Spider-Man Homecoming, there was a lot of people who have been on that Sinister Six roster in that movie. And the tail, like, I think it's the end credits where he's Vulture's in jail, visited by people. Mm-hmm. Sony's the Screen Rant article links name drops Amy Pascal, like one of the producers, as someone who's still very high on that idea.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, if that one comes,
the original Sinister Six, the only two that we've seen in the MCU who are part of the original Sinister Six are Vulture and Mysterio.
Also, can we talk about it? It's going to be Jamie Foxx again.
Yeah. He said he's not going to be blue this time, so that's something. That's something. So
he's not Ultimate Electro.
Yes. Well, a terrible version of Ultimate Electro. I have a theory about this that Sony is really leaning heavy into the Spider-Verse thing, and kind of showing that these universes all have similarities. So J.K. Simmons is back, we've already seen, and now Jamie Foxx is coming back. And my theory is that they're going to do their own spin-off movies that can now have Peter Parker in them,
right?
And say maybe it's in the MCU, maybe it's in a different universe. It's the same, and that kind of frees the MCU to be able to say their stuff isn't part of us, but they can still use Peter Parker. They can still use Tom Holland in all of them. Right. So that's my nerdy theory about how this is all going down. But
earlier, I think late last year and early this year, there was a rumor, or maybe fan fueled or whatever, but it seemed to be building up, where there was a lot of speculation online of Sony wanting to do kind of a live action Spider-Verse, and that it would include Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland. But then also, like, as a way to set up, like, hey, there's all these three have existed. They do exist, just in different universes. That one, if it gains traction, color me interested.
Sure.
I'm not the biggest fan of the Tobey Spider-Man, but I'm still I'd still be curious.
I also kind of wonder how much we're going to get into the weeds of that in the Doctor Strange movie that's coming out, the Multiverse of Madness, right? I feel like they're not going to bog their movie down with, hey, look at all these cool Easter eggs, but like if they can do them cleverly, I don't see why they wouldn't, right? I mean, they could even, use, like, they could visit the MCU, the X-Men Fox universe. They could visit, the Netflix universe. They could establish that, these things happen in a different universe, but actually, Charlie Cox also exists as Daredevil in this universe. Like, so you don't take away from one without, saying it's all part of the same thing.
I still want a Daredevil movie directed by Ben Affleck starring Charlie Cox. Just give me that. I did, and I stand by it. It'd be amazing.
I want a Daredevil movie directed by Charlie Cox starring Ben Affleck.
Also, that'd be amazing.
I want a Daredevil verse movie with both of them.
And I
I
feel
want
like
to see Jennifer Garner and Elodie Young fight as Elektra.
I feel like Ben Affleck would just have fun ripping Daredevil to shreds as Daredevil.
He can play the overweight loser Daredevil like
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, just back to quickly on the Multiverse of Madness. I still think my theory is that's going to be how we're going to introduce the mutants to the MCU. To me, that makes the most sense. Like just a reverse M Day.
Yeah. I can't wait for WandaVision to come out and learn more about what's going on with that, and then she's going to be
so weird, and I love it.
She's going to be in the Multiverse of Madness, right? So, I mean, you
Yeah.
could do like an anti-No More Mutants thing, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, more mutants.
Exactly. And apparently, I still don't know if it's official, but what's his name? I talked about it with Hector earlier. The dude from Star Wars, Poe Dameron, the actor, Oscar Isaac,
Yeah.
playing Moon Knight, where I'm like, color me the heck interested. I think
yeah, that was a rumor. I don't think it's
not official.
Anything. Yeah.
Okay. I think he could knock that out of the park, and it gives him a chance to redeem himself with the comic crowd for X-Men Apocalypse, which not his fault. Not his fault.
Nope, not his fault at all. So, but going back to the Sinister
Spider-Man?
Six, one of the weird things I heard about that movie was that it was supposed to be not a Spider-Man movie. It's like the Sinister Six are the characters, and Spider-Man shows up. I think I heard like not Peter Parker, but Spider-Man's in it. And so they're like he's the villain, right? The boogeyman that they're trying to defeat, but it's not about Peter Parker.
Yeah.
It's not about his perspective. It's their perspective. So, I mean, I don't know. Like at this point, do they just use the Scorpion and the Shocker and I mean, the Shocker is so underpowered in these movies compared to everyone else. I don't know how they do that, but the Vulture and I don't know Morbius. Like they've had the crossover with Morbius and with Michael Keaton showing up in that trailer. They could put Venom in it. I don't know what they're gonna do. Because that's not the original Sinister Six, right? The original Sinister Six would be Doctor Octopus, Kraven, Electro, Mysterio, Vulture, and I forget. I'm blanking right now. Sandman.
Oh, there we go.
Or they could do the Insidious Six from the '90s cartoon and have whoever the Rhino and Shocker and whoever else they had on there.
Sinister because weird censorship issues. So as you describe that, I don't actually hate that idea necessarily. Like it's one of those on paper. I'm like that's kind of doable. I don't know if you saw it, but DC in their straight to DVD adaptations, they did Assault on Arkham, which took place in the Arkhamverse. Okay. But it was mostly a Suicide Squad movie, and Batman was a peripheral character. Like he showed up, he was much more involved in the third act, but almost like you could say the boogeyman. Like it's the Suicide Squad. They were going in for other reasons.
Yeah.
But Batman would show up periodically, like as the one of the threats looming over them. I'm like, I like that I like that movie a lot. You could do it. It could work. So that's one of those where I'm like, I hate what you did to Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man movies in general by trying to overstuff everything. But that's the fun of this series where you're like, okay, let's acknowledge the criticisms, but still see. In this one, I'm like, you know what? On paper, this is kind of a cool idea.
Yeah. I do kind of like what DC's done, although their execution has been bad, of just saying, you know what? We don't have to set this up. Let's just throw these characters in a movie and do it, right? It doesn't need to all be connected. Like, if you want to do an Ocean's 11, Ocean's 6, you know, Octavius's 6, and just do a fun heist movie with the Sinister Six with Spider-Man in the background, like, I am in for that movie.
Yeah.
I would totally watch that movie, and you can make it serious or you can make it more goofy. Like there was a series that was going for a while, a comic series called The Superior Foes of Spider-Man, done by Nick Spencer, who's writing Amazing Spider-Man right now, and it was just ridiculous. Like it was just like implausibly dumb all the way through it, and it was these 5 characters: Boomerang, Shocker, the new Beetle, who's Tombstone's daughter, Speed Demon, and Overdrive, who can turn anything into any kind of vehicle into like a supercharged vehicle. That's his like nanite powers. So like he kidnaps a school bus full of children and turns it into a war machine and drives away, like that kind of thing, right? Stupid, like the most ridiculous B-list villains, D-list villains ever. And it was them trying
I
to be the
think
Sinister
B
Six,
is
even though
even generous. It's definitely like D or lower.
yeah. So they decide that they're the Sinister Six, even though there's only five of them. They can't find a sixth person to be part of it, and it's just like it's so funny and so ridiculous. And at the end of it, you find out it's just so Boomerang just keeps throwing them all under the bus and like screwing over his team because he's just out for himself. And by the end, they all hate him. And the very last scene of the series is him sitting down at a bar talking to Peter Parker, telling the story. So you don't know if any of it's true. Like it's just the whole thing has just been him telling this story, and it's so well done. So a movie like that, I like it'd be funny, it'd be good. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be. It can be a good movie without having to be like cinema,
Well,
or
exactly. We live in a post Fast Five world, dude. Like
is that the line in the sand? Fast Five.
well, in a weird way for me, that's the one. Like that's the series where I'm just like, you know what? I'm just gonna embrace enjoying like ridiculous, over the top things. Because it was like around that time, you also got Expendables 1 and 2, which are their own kind of over the top absurdity, and just be like, just unapologetically do this and enjoy it. There's room for it. It doesn't have to be high art as comic book movies or big blockbuster movies can be. It doesn't have to be. You can do this. Like, let's just have fun with these sometimes.
Yeah, like The Dark Knight was one of the worst things that ever happened to comic book movies because everything tried to be The Dark Knight for a while, but
well,
can't.
No, exactly, and not every character lends themselves to that.
It was also the best thing that happened to comic book movies because before that, no one had taken them seriously, right? So I mean,
it's this catch-22. Just like the MCU is one of the best and worst things that happened to film because it opened the shared universe Pandora's box, and then everybody's trying to do it in outside of the Monsterverse, not really working so well. So
the NBC Monsterverse.
No. The Monsterverse is Legendary's Godzilla and King Kong movies.
Oh, that one. I thought you meant like the Dracula, Invisible Man, Mummy.
No, that was Dead on Arrival.
Yeah, that didn't work at all.
So yeah, there was back to Spider-Man. We had these planned spin-offs. One that I'd say up until recently it hadn't been officially canceled was Silver and Black, which was going to be, to me, it's just weird because it's a Silver Sable and Black Cat movie, and it just doesn't make any sense to me.
They're just two sexy femme fatales that have colors in their name, so they're like, we could put them together.
Whereas a lesser-known spin-off, I'm trying to get it on the Looper article, was Glass Ceiling.
Yeah, it sounds like Silver and Black is a paring down of the concept of Glass Ceiling.
But Glass Ceiling, where it's all that's known about it was it would have featured a variety of female Spider-Man characters teaming up, including Black Cat, Silver Sable, Spider-Woman, Spider-Girl, and Silk. Although not much detail has been released. But when I read that, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of interested in that. Like, I'm curious about which Spider-Girl they would have gone with, just because I think the best Spider-Girl.
Which Spider-Woman? There's.
Well, I imagine Jessica Drew. And then with Spider-Girl, I'm like, the most well-known and best Spider-Girl is Mayday Parker. So then how would they have done that? And
well,
I
that's the thing. If you have
Silk, her weird introduction aside, I really like the character Silk, especially in her solo series. So with some of these, I'm like, I like all these characters. If you can do a good story, I'm down. On paper, why not? Just like after Avengers, there was brief talk. I have no idea where it's at, but there was rumored of the A-Force movie, which for listeners, if you don't know, in the comics, A-Force was like a women's only Avenger team. And it's like, hey, why not? Honestly, you can. You've got the story. You've done the story before. And if you can do it well, why not? So with this, it's just kind of like I'm interested in the loose concept of this.
Yeah. Is the
And more
title is the title is there's like a phrase about like smashing the glass ceiling and like
exactly.
getting ahead or something like that?
I think it is a nod to that, but it's also I think you can do those kind of nods in the right kind of way. Like you
Sure.
can have those girl power stuff without it trying to alienate or stuff.
You're talking
Where
about Ghostbusters, aren't you?
loosely I'm skirting around it. Yeah, because when the directors are going out being like, if you're saying negative stuff about this movie, you're sexist. You're alienating a bunch of people and valid criticism.
Yeah.
Of course, there were idiot sexists who did stuff about those movies.
I haven't
Um,
seen it, so
yeah. This is one where I'm like, I'm color me interested. What were some of the other ones?
Craven.
Yes. So that I don't know anything about this one.
So basically, all I've heard about this, and I think this is still in the works, is uh, they were planning on doing Craven's Last Hunt, which seems like you need to have Craven established before you do that. But maybe you don't. Maybe you do it differently, and it's just a different kind of story of this guy who just shows up out of nowhere and tries to kill Spider-Man and then takes his place.
Kind of
But
like Ultimate Spider-Man, a little bit.
sorry.
Shades of Ultimate Spider-Man.
Well, in Ultimate Spider-Man, Craven ends up just being a reality TV star with no powers, and Spider-Man takes him out with one punch, which is pretty funny. Uh, until he eventually gets powers.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, Craven's whole thing is he's always been trying to hunt Spider-Man, right? But then Craven's Last Hunt goes into again, J.M. DeMatteis, very psychological, deep, gritty. He
Yeah.
originally meant it as a Batman story, but they wouldn't let him kill off any of Batman's villains. They wanted it as a Joker story, I think. But it's this idea that Craven is just so depressed that he hasn't done anything with his life that he wants to commit suicide. And you don't find that out till the end, but he captures Spider-Man by like eating spiders and doing. He always takes like, you know, elixirs that he learned from witch doctors in Africa, kind of thing, to give him his powers. And he kind of takes on the essence of the spider as a hunter and captures Spider-Man, drugs him, buries him alive, and then takes his place and just brutalizes people dressed up as Spider-Man for a while. And part of what makes the story work is it's the very next thing that happens after Spider-Man and Mary Jane get married. So they get married, they go on their honeymoon, they come back, and he just goes missing. And so Mary Jane's like flipping out in this story. And then Spider-Man wakes up in a coffin and has to crawl his way out from under the ground, and then they fight, and then Craven kills himself.
Yeah.
So it's this really dark, psychological, scary story that I'm not sure it's where you want to start with Craven, but if you don't start there, Craven's kind of dumb. So I don't know.
Well, it's whenever I've brought up Craven's Last Hunt to people, like people look at Craven almost as a joke.
Yeah.
And Craven is one of those characters who exists well in the comic medium and the animated medium. I think he's difficult to do a translation to on the big screen.
Yeah.
And then
Craven,
also,
Craven is a character that started off weird, and then they gave him laser nipples, and then it was like, what are you doing? So in Ditko's, he wore the lion thing and the loincloth, and then after Ditko left, Stan Lee and John Romita did some stories where he had like laser beams that shot out of the eyes on his lion's mane's thing here, and they shot out of his chest. There's a famous
laser nips.
Deadpool story where Deadpool goes back into time to that issue and poses as Spider-Man, and he just makes fun of everything that's going on in the story.
There was a Deadpool run where the intro to each issue would be Deadpool going back in time to someone else's issue. Like one had Deadpool ripping on the Demon in the Bottle storyline, where he dresses up as Iron Man and he's getting drunk while flying around as Iron Man.
Yeah.
Craven is an interesting character to do, and also the reality is, as good of a story as Craven's Last Hunt is, I don't know if they do that adaptation. Like the MCU, even though they'll kill characters off, especially in like Endgame and Infinity War, this is also a different level. So it wouldn't surprise me if they did some changes. But Craven, I think there was a fan rumor from Spider-Man Home Alone 2 Lost in Europe where the bus driver, like people are like, that guy's Craven, or something like that.
He does
So
look like Craven. Yeah.
if you wanted Craven set up, you set him up in the Sinister Six, and you just have him be one of the more prominent roles, and maybe have him show up in supporting roles and other stuff. You can't just throw him on the big screen right away. But
Yeah, I think that guy's going to turn out to be Chameleon if he's anything. I think his name is Dimitri even in the movie. So Chameleon is Craven's half brother or something like that.
right.
But yeah, he did look
In
like Craven.
In the '90s Spider-Man cartoon, he was Red Skull's son,
Who was?
Chameleon or Electro.
I thought Electro was. Because Electro
but
comes
wasn't
and he's been
Chameleon
fighting
his
with
brother?
Captain America in that stasis for
Yeah.
however many years. So I think it's
But
Electro.
wasn't Chameleon his brother or something?
I don't think so, because Chameleon shows up way earlier, right? And he poses as Nick Fury, but he's got the eye patch in the wrong eye.
But then they
And-
bring him back, and I'll just have to rewatch the show on Disney Plus.
Yeah, you have
Woe
to.
is me.
Yeah.
So also the one that I had no idea about was rumored
Yeah.
on
And this is
May.
Yeah, the Aunt May movie, which I think was just a rumor. Like, Sony has come out and just said, no, we were never going to do that.
When was it rumored?
The rumor was that it was Aunt May in her younger years. So obviously not Marissa Tomei because she's already young. I guess she's like 50 though. Anyway, as a spy, her days as a spy in her younger years. Now, the reason that has some credibility is because if you know the story of Peter Parker's parents in the comics, they
Right.
were spies, right? Before they
Right.
died. They were killed by the Red Skull. It's Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 5 tells the backstory that they were double agents and they were undercover with the Red Skull in Tunisia or something like that, and then the Red Skull found out and killed them.
And they were kind of doing some stuff along those lines in Amazing Spider-Man. Like he was involved with heavy
Amazing
duty
Spider-Man,
stuff.
It was more like science. It was more along the lines of the Ultimate Spider-Man stuff, where there were scientists that got killed by an evil corporation, an Oscorp in this in that case. But yeah, so the other thing that came out that people were talking about in relationship to this movie is there's a really, really, really bad comic that came out in the 2000s called Trouble, and I can't believe you never heard of this. So this was Marvel trying something different, trying to get into the YA CW type field, and it was written by Mark Millar, I think drawn by Terry Dodson. Maybe I could be wrong with that. And it basically is the story of these two brothers, Ben and Richard Parker, and their hijinks and their girlfriends, May and Mary. And in the course of the movie or of the series, Richard Parker cheats on somebody cheats on somebody, and I think it's implied that I think it's Richard and May get pregnant with Peter. So Peter's actually May's, and it was kind of like at the time being like, it's up to you. Is this canon or isn't it canon? And it's just like trashy and stupid and like much more of Aunt May than you ever wanted to see, and just not. Yeah. So like there was that whole kind of like when this rumor came out, people were like, "Uh-oh, is it going to be trouble?" And it's largely panned and forgotten about. But yeah, so that's that Aunt May rumor that Sony has just said no, that's not what we were going to do.
Whereas now, you could just do a rom-com with her and Happy Hogan, and that's a halfway decent idea, and I'd kind of be in. So there is one more.
Is there?
Yes, there is. Not much is known about it, but it's almost like the one more me and Mike talked about. And in that one, it was what was Ben Affleck's solo Batman going to be. And then for this, it's what was the MCU-less Spider-Man 3.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
not much is really known about that. Like, I don't think they've shared many details. Um,
Do you think they actually had a plan for it, or was that all just posturing to get more money?
I think if push came to shove, they would have. Like, when you look at the deal, like, you could argue, and we did an episode on it. Like, maybe Marvel pushed too hard, or Disney pushed too hard,
Yeah.
or too much. Um, but Sony ain't gonna let this thing go. Like, they're just not.
Yeah.
It's one of, if not their biggest franchise. They're not gonna let these rights go. So they
Yeah.
would have
What do
been
they
like,
have?
yeah,
Like Jumanji probably is the only other thing.
Jumanji, yeah, and that
Yeah.
that success has surprised everybody. And I think they have Bond now, because MGM went bankrupt.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's why The Hobbit took so long to come out, and there was a long gap between Bond movies.
Mm.
Um, so I think I could be wrong about Sony owning it, but I think Sony owns Bond now.
Okay.
But
That
Spider-Man
all
is like,
came full circle.
yeah. So like Spider-Man is their cash cow, so they would have done it.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, like, don't get me wrong, I'm beyond thrilled that Spider-Man is back in the MCU, and we'll see if it lasts beyond this movie. As long
Hmm.
as the relationship is financially mutually beneficial, I have no doubt that it'll keep going. But Sony clearly has plans for the other characters, that they own the rights to, because they own the rights to the Spider-Man characters.
Hmm.
Um, so if the idea of Spider-Man on the run is what they're going with, his identity is public now. So unless they come up with a way to figure out like how they're gonna just shoot that down, like towards the beginning of the movie, a Spider-Man without the rest of the MCU characters lends itself to that story the most.
Hmm.
So that it's one of those like, hey, could you do uh Marvel's doing their what if show. Can you do this? Can you go with like some of the stuff? Because I'm really curious about this one. I don't think they had any story in mind because it was so early in the production of
Well,
Spider-Man.
it was like a month after the Spider-Man 2 came out.
Exactly.
Homecoming
So
or Far From Home.
I am curious to see what it was. Um, but Tom Holland, like, there's a quote here from Tom Holland where he's like, the future of Spider-Man is still very bright with Sony. We had a really, really wonderful idea of how we could sort of transition into a Spider-Man without the MCU. Like, that's all that's known. So Holland was behind the idea, but that also could be Tom Holland just doing PR.
Yeah, I think it probably like it definitely is at least that because that's part of the reason that Andrew Garfield got fired, right? Is because he was
Yeah,
openly upset about Amazing Spider-Man 2
yeah, he was
and like
critical.
yeah. And he's talked about how heartbreaking that process was for him because he loved the character and they ended up not being good movies because of the studio interference.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah,
I mean maybe he's being honest too, but I just don't believe
yeah.
I
Like,
don't believe him.
well,
Like,
even if not much was known, he could have like when you're reading that statement at face value, it could be a genuine like, I'm interested, I'm curious, like, I'm not doom and glooming this, like,
yeah.
I'm still going to be this character and I'm excited to see where we're going to go. It
Yeah.
could just be like, hey, I'm not out of a job and I love playing this character. But this is one where I'm just like, I am curious about what they would have done because this version of Spider-Man is so ingrained with the MCU
Hmm.
that to suddenly remove him, like, you could do the story where not having access to any of the other characters makes sense, but for one story, like, you can't rip this guy from this universe, period. Like, for a single
Yeah.
story, sure, but for ongoing purposes, the MCU is ingrained in him.
Yeah.
But I can't deny this is one where I'd be like, yeah, do a what if or an animated. If there were enough ideas, I'm legit just curious what it would have been.
Mm. Yeah. I mean I mean, there's all these movies that haven't been made yet, right? Like the whatever
Yeah.
this Spider-Man 3 is going to be, and then the next Spider-Verse movies, and all the Venom left to be Carnage and Morbius and all those other ones. But
If the Venom movie with Carnage isn't rated R, like it's just one of those. I don't get it.
he's gonna go around and try and suck people's souls into a jar to feed them out. That's how they avoid the blood.
Like, to me, the only thing, like, if you're going with Cletus Cassidy Carnage, then if you're doing him properly, it's an R rating. Like, if the only authentic PG-13 Carnage you could do is Ultimate Carnage, where it's not a person, but it literally drains like the life force out of people and then they're husks. You can do that in a PG-13.
But
But
that
you
wasn't a
can't
very
have
good version of Carnage. Like
it wasn't, but it's one that
Yeah.
could work in a PG-13.
Sure.
Like a guy with axe hands, like cutting through people, who's a mass murderer.
Yeah.
This is an R rating. Like, all right. So, Steve, any final thoughts? Are there any of these that you are more interested in or excited by than others, where you'd be like, yeah, I want that one, or are there some where you're just like, I'm glad this never saw the light of day?
I like where we are with Spider-Man, but
Yeah.
I remember being frustrated we didn't get the Spider-Man 4. I remember being frustrated we didn't get Amazing Spider-Man 3. I mean, not really, because I was like Spider-Man in the MCU. That's awesome. That's better.
Yeah.
At least, I give up on Sony. But like, yeah, that sense of this isn't a completed story and that there's more things that they've been planning for. I mean, those really early versions which probably wouldn't have been great anyway, because of just really it wasn't until the 2000s when the technology for the special effects was really catching up to doing these movies well, right? Like you can do Batman in the 80s because he doesn't do the kind of things that Spider-Man does, right?
Right.
But like those early pitches of I've always wanted to see basically the night Gwen Stacy died recreated in a good movie, right? Like to get Mary Jane's character right, where she's this flaky girl who has commitment issues, who's changed by that. Like there's a scene at the end of the story of when Gwen Stacy dies, when she's trying to cheer Peter up in her flaky way, and he's just not having it.
Yeah.
Tells her to get out of here, and she just stays. She closes the door and stays with him, and that's how the issue ends. And like that, those kind of character moments are really big and poignant, and Harry with his dad. I mean, you kind of got pretty good Harry stuff I think in the Raimi movies with the way he reacted to his dad. But yeah, I'd love to see. I had this vision of what like the typical the Ultimate Spider-Man movie would be that I haven't seen yet. Though I have liked a lot of the things that have come out. And I feel like maybe one of those earlier movies might have been more like the David Fincher one, might have been more along the lines of that. But
yeah,
who knows?
We
might have gotten Dr. Zork too. So
the rest is all right, but Zork. Yeah, I think out of all the ones, the one that I'm most interested in is that David Fincher one, top to bottom, just because Fincher does Fincher movies, and I think Spider-Man could work within that framework, and it could be crazy interesting.
He did Alien 3.
He did Alien 3, and he disavowed it because that was studio interference galore. Sure. At some point, I'm going to do an Alien Unmade episode, and I honestly might do. Alien 3 might get its own episode within that because of how many different versions of Alien 3 there were before it eventually came.
What other movies did David Fincher do? I'm not familiar with him.
One of his most recent ones, this stands out a lot, is Gone Baby. Is it Gone Baby Gone? The one with starred Ben Affleck, or Gone Girl. Horrifying movie, like terrifically acted. But at one point, someone I knew, he was like, "Hey, I'm taking my my girlfriend on a date. We're gonna go see a movie. I'm like, oh, what movie? And he's like, we're gonna go see Gone Girl. I'm like, don't do it. Not a date movie. Don't do it. Because it's all about these two terrible people and the spoilers. The guy's wife, after she finds out he's cheating on her, like she fakes her death. She sets him up for frames him for murder and she kills a bunch of other people. It's
Okay.
a psychological thriller, so terrifically made, but I don't need to go to it again.
Right down Spider-Man's alley.
But you can see where some of the stuff could translate there. There's some along here. The only one that I'm vehemently against is outside of the caveat of Edward Furlong and especially Arnie as Doc Ock is the James Cameron Spider-Man one. Like, as much as I didn't enjoy the Sam Raimi ones, I don't hate the ideas of Spider-Man 4. His Spider-Man 4, the Amazing Spider-Man 3 one, I'm crazy curious about. Like, that could be a lot of fun. So that's what I really enjoy about this this sub-series, is finding all these things that you didn't know, or you're like, huh. Like, I'll as much as I can separate my fanboy brain from it and just be like, that's interesting. Like, even though it's not what it should be, that could still be a lot of fun. So thank you. You did a lot of the work on this one. Like, I sent you articles, but then you had specific breakdown ones, and then I learned about ones that I didn't even know about. So, Steve, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, well, dear listener, I think that brings us to the end of today's episode of Unmade. I don't know when the next episode will drop, but coming up on this sub-series, we're going to look at Star Wars, which will be a fun way to explore the sequel trilogy that never was, because it's not what we got in either of its incarnations, because there was plans for it way back in the 70s, and then Lucas has revealed some of the stuff he was planning about doing it recently, because he did make pitches to Disney. We will also look at Star Trek movies that didn't get made. I already mentioned Alien. I love this sub-series because there's so many fun things to look at. And there's going to be a lot of bad movies to talk about. And in the fun way, where I get to talk about them where I don't hate every single second about it. So,
cool. We should do an episode that's unmade episodes of this episode.
unmade episodes?
Things that we're not talking about.
Things that
we could have talked about this, and that would have been fun. We could have talked about this, and that would have been fun.
I eventually could do unmade one cross radio episodes, because I've got several where I got through it, or I got part way through it, and I'm like, I'm not doing this. Like, screw this episode. It's coming in bad. Or while I was away, I recorded an episode, and afterwards I was just like, that was just 30 minutes of me rambling. Like, not even good rambling. Like, gone. It's deleted. It's not seeing the light of day. So maybe eventually.
For someone who does a pretty rambly podcast, that must have been really rambly.
It was. My idea of it was like, this will be 5 minutes. 35 minutes. I'm like, why? No, just gone. So, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, and of course, also Godzilla, Gamera, other ones like these long franchises that have existed forever.
You said Bond as well.
Oh, yeah, Bond, because there's several unmade Bond ones. And Steve, just a plug to the listeners, I don't know when we'll get around to them, but there's episodes you and I have to do. I know at one point we were planning on doing either a 90s comic book one, but we could also narrow that down a bit to look at Marvel 90s comics, or particularly Spider-Man ones.
Yeah, that just involves some research.
We both got to do homework for that. Yeah.
But the 90s is such a crazy time in comics in general. So just even outside of Spider-Man, I think it'd probably be easier to do a broad one rather than the minutia of one comic. But
deal. If we ever want to do a Clone Saga one, we could.
I have. If you're watching all those comics there, the Clone Saga, I haven't read them yet. I'm working my way through Spider-Man right now. It's a long, slow process.
And then, of course, we'll do Bond. And then at some point, I'd love to do another Ask a Pastor with you, sir. So
yeah, for sure.
Stay tuned for those, dear listener. And Steve, off camera, we'll figure out a time.
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. It's always wonderful And dear listener, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of One Cross Radio. Want to shout out our patrons, Bex and Nathan. Thank you guys so much for contributing the coffee that fuels me. And yeah, thank you for being patrons and supporting the show. Listener, if you want to check out our Patreon, we got a couple tiers. Hit us up at patreon.com/onecrossradio. We post memes, behind the scenes stuff, and sometimes just pictures of Luna because Luna is amazing. And all that being said, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy, and God bless, my friends. Take care.
See ya.
Peace.